Well, welcome back to Talking with Tech. I'm Rachel Madel, joined today by Chris Bugay. How are you, Chris?
I'm fantastic. Now that my computer's working, we just crashed it.
I know. You know why? It's because we're missing our third link. Lucas is not here today, which is sad. It feels lonely. It feels lonely recording without Lucas.
I know. We miss you, Lucas.
Yeah.
But now we're going to talk without you anyway.
We're going to just keep on keeping on. Lucas is at a conference right now and unfortunately wasn't able to join us, but he's sorely missed. And especially because today we're talking about something I'm really excited. We're talking about autism, an area that I work a lot in. I work with a lot of kids with autism. I have a lot to say. It's an area of AAC that is, it's changing. It's exciting because a lot more people are realizing the power of AAC with kids with autism. So let's dive right in. What are the special characteristics that kids with autism bring to the table when it comes to AAC?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first common things, and it's hard to talk about it because you don't want to overgeneralize because there's so many different people who have autism and their characteristics are different for everybody. So you don't want to just say, well, because you have autism, then I'm going to generalize and this is how it is for everybody. But in general, people with autism have less social communication, so the pragmatics are often difficult. The different functions of why you're using language are why do I need to use language? It is sometimes difficult. Yeah,
well, I think that you hit the nail on the head, the pragmatics piece. I think that a lot of times kids with autism don't understand the purpose of language a lot of times. And when I work with kids who don't have autism, they're very interested in initiating, they're very interested in communicating, and that level of interest isn't always there with kids with autism. I think that speaking to interests, kids with autism sometimes have very limited interests. So instead of bringing a toy bag out and having lots of fun toys that, another child might get really excited to talk about and to play with, the kid with autism, he's not interested. He might just like balloons or trains or whatever it might be. So I think that that's another kind of challenge when it comes to, communication in general. And we know that motivation is the key, right? We need to have a motivation to communicate. And when we're only motivated by a handful of things, that makes our job a lot more challenging, especially when, we want to make sure we're giving lots of variety of language and exposure and, how many different core words can you use with one stimulus? It's sometimes challenging.
Absolutely. I think the other big characteristic is that just part of the definition of autism is that it affects language. So there, not just pragmatics, but in general, it's a disability that's related to language. And so in every case, you're probably going to have a speech language pathologist involved trying to help build the language connections. What do words mean? How do we put words together? What are those different endings on words? And then how do we use words in different ways to have different meanings?
Yeah, and kind of going off of that too, what happens when there's other intellectual disabilities at play, which I kind of, that comes into my practice a lot. Kids have issues with learning. Kids with autism have issues with learning, and it's not that language piece is hard. The receptive language, we know the expressive language is hard, if we're trying to introduce AAC, but the receptive language a lot of times is challenging. So I think that that's a huge piece. And I don't know about you, Chris, but I have a lot of experience with kids who have intellectual disabilities. A lot of people feel like we wouldn't do high-tech AAC with a child like that because they won't get it, or there's tons of myths around that. Do you experience the same thing?
Just this week, I heard it from an administrator that said, that student over there, because he has Down syndrome, which is, of course, different than autism, right? But of course, you could have autism and have Down syndrome, right? Mm-hmm. But just because that student has an intellectual disability, I don't think we need to use that particular communication app. That communication app is more for those other sorts of kids. It's like, wait, what? No, it doesn't work like that. Like that, if you have autism, then you get this. And if you have an intellectual disability, like maybe let's say Down syndrome, then you get that. It's like we look at the individual characteristics of every student and then make decisions based on those characteristics. It's not just these giant camps.
Yeah. And I would argue that, if we're having challenges with learning, using AAC, high-tech AAC is actually even more important, because that could be the tool that helps, it click for a child and allows them to understand and have the receptive language to really start solidifying these concepts and then using them. And since we're in the spirit of myth busting, I have another myth that I'd like to bust. I work with a lot of kids who are very verbal, who I think it's imperative that they're using AAC. And a lot of teachers that I go into the classroom and I go into these IEP meetings and I'm recommending AAC and they're like, why? This kid's talking. But let's look at what they're actually saying. Are they, using language spontaneously? Are they initiating? Are they, formulating complex sentences? All of these things need to be taken into account when we're thinking about a child's ability to quote unquote speak verbally. Because what I'm finding is, yes, children might be very verbal with autism, but, they're doing so much scripting. Everything is a memorized script sometimes. And that's not true language. I've learned this script that pairs with this routine and I can say it, but I'm not able to break out of that script because I don't have the foundational tools necessary to formulate my own thoughts. So what I'm doing a lot of is recommending AAC for kids who are very verbal. Whenever I'm talking to teams to try to impress upon the idea that AAC is useful for kids who are verbal, I talk about the scripts that they're using. I always talk about the I want script, because a lot of times kids with autism are using that. They're using that phrase very frequently, but they don't understand that I want is two separate words. They just kind of have learned them as a chunked phrase. And we can't go a lot of places from that. We can't say mommy wants or you want. We can't switch out the verb and use I with a different verb. So what that shows me is that there's a receptive language challenge and difficulty. And what I love about AAC, especially high-tech AAC, is that you have that message window and every word has an icon and it has, the label. And so it really teaches this is two separate words. We take for granted the fact that we are literate. We read, we understand that I want is two separate words, but kids don't always understand that. And that's one of the many benefits of using a high-tech system for kids who are verbal with AAC.
Yeah, so Rachel, what's so interesting there is that I think what you're really talking about is not just high-tech AAC, but high-tech AAC that is got all the words, right? So, and usually those words are organized in some sort of fashion. So if you take the Lamp Words for Life or Pull Quo with the new Crescendo or really any of the other ones, the words, for the most part, try and stay in a similar area, right? And remove motor planning. I'm not even talking about that. Just that they're in this, the words are presented in a structured manner. So with that structure, the way I like to equate it for people who often say like, well, yeah, they're talking, they don't need this. Well, the high-tech AAC is really a teaching tool for them to be even more verbal. And so here's how that specifically works is like, think back to when we were taking tests in our graduate program or undergraduate program, right? I mean, most people have taken a test somewhere in their life, right? Rachel, you took tests?
Unfortunately, yes, I took lots of tests.
All right. And so when you took a test, you maybe had your paper, pencil, notebook, and you wrote down like some sort of mnemonic, and you had it in the top right-hand corner, okay, the cranial nerves, and I got to memorize these so we can spit it back up on the test. And so you write that, right?
I'm like laughing over here because I was actually ridiculed in grad school because I need to write to learn, and I always had mnemonic devices, but I actually had a whiteboard. So I felt so guilty about wasting so much paper that I would just write it on a whiteboard, erase, write it on a whiteboard, write it on a whiteboard and erase. And so everyone kind of knew me as the whiteboard girl in grad school. So anyway, yes, continue though.
Then you could remember, right? So it comes down to take the test. And whether you write it on a notebook or your whiteboard or wherever you had it, you can kind of picture where it was in your mind. You're like, okay, that was in the top right-hand corner. The nerves were X, Y, Z. Like that was 3 pages in my notebook, or that was the one I wrote in my red pen and I wiped off, but you remember it because visually you have a visual model of how it looked for you, right? That is how I picture students with autism learning language just in general, right? If you look at Temple Grandin and she talks about how you think in pictures, right? So here's thousands of words organized in some structure where they try to keep words in the same similar location. So a student can then visually think about, okay, where are the words and how do I say them and how I combine them? And I find that analogy resonates with people because they go, oh yeah, I remember taking tests and using that same strategy, right? Well, that's what kids are doing for every single word, and not just words, but parts of words and tenses of words and other words related to those words. It's all thinking of it visually.
Have you ever heard of the book Moonwalking with Einstein?
No.
It's a really good one. It has nothing to do with speech therapy or AAC, but what it is it's a journalist who it's all about kind of executive functioning skills, specifically memory. And he decides that he's going to try out, or I guess audition for the World Memory Championships. So he deep dives into memory and how, thoughts and concepts are stored as memories. And one of the biggest takeaways from that book for me was how strong our visual memory is. And so he talks about kind of all these hacks to remember, excruciating details and things like that. And it's to visualize. So that's when you were kind of talking about that analogy, which I love because I think everybody can relate to it. It reminded me of that book and how powerful visual imagery is for memory. So absolutely. I think that's exactly right. The other thing that I wanted to say to kind of go off of that as well, I work with a lot of children with autism who are verbal, and they have extreme challenges with word retrieval. So, they can't pull those words and say them, but the moment you put their device in front of them, it's like they can find those words so quickly. So it's just a perfect reminder that, it doesn't have to be so hard. AAC makes things easier for kids, and even though they're verbal, why make them struggle? I've seen the wave of relief when a child's trying to communicate something to me verbally, and I'm like, where's your device? I find it, I put it in front of them, and it's just like this sigh of relief, and they just, quickly navigate to whatever it is, whatever word they're trying to find or type, if they're, able to type.
All right, Rachel, do something for me real quick, right? Yeah, you have a computer in front of you, right?
I do.
You do, right? Okay, put your hands over the keyboard, all right? And tell me what row and how many cells over is the letter C?
What row and...
Come on, Rachel, you type every day.
I don't know, but I've learned the motor plans, Chris.
But now take your hands away and look, right? So what I'm getting at from that idea is that just what you were saying, like kids who have word recall, it's like, here's another analogy, right? Tell me all your cousins, Rachel. Tell me all the names of all of your cousins. Right?
Oh my goodness. Bill, Rich.
But see, your eyes float up. You guys can't see it, but I can see Rachel. Her eyes flutter up and she's thinking, who are my cousins, right? And trying to go through their names. But if I brought out a family photo album and said, hey, so what are the names of your cousins? You'd be like, oh, that's Bill, that's Rich, that's,
and just taking it a step further, if you showed me a picture of my family, even for a fleeting second, it would help me. If you took it away, I would still be like, bam, 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 bam. So it's just the power of visual imagery, which we know is one of the, greatest benefits of AAC.
Yeah, totally. That's, I think, and having, again, organized so that you can quickly recall where they are and find them,
Yeah. And I love that organization piece too, because that's what's so important, right? Being able to have things in a uniform fashion that make it easy to, find. And that's what the benefit of these grid systems is that we can very easily navigate. And that's something that's so important when we're, working with kids with AAC and assessing kids for AAC, is making sure that, we're supporting their ability to navigate independently, and, setting things up so that it makes sense. It makes sense for the user and, their specific experience and individual characteristics. Well, I'm really excited to actually dive right into our interview with Scott Badesch. He's from the Autism Society of America. So without further ado, let's head into the interview with Scott.
Well, welcome back once again to Speech Science. This is Lucas Stuber, joined today by Scott Badesch of the Autism Society of America. How are you, sir?
Fine. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm enjoying our Portland weather out here, although I understand yours is a little up and down right now.
Yeah, it's Washington, D.C. Everything's up and down in Washington, D.C., so why should the weather be any different, right? So.
Yeah, fair point. Very good point. Well, I guess first of all, I'd just like to ask you just to tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you to where you are today.
Well, I'm soon to be 65, and my professional career now has been 43 years. And I originally, I grew up in a family that was very social service oriented, and very much of giving back, and learned at a very early age the responsibility of helping your neighbor and helping those who have needs. College and graduate degree in social service administration, and went to work for United Ways, and loved working there for a long time. I then, as much as I loved United Way, I got approached about getting involved with the Autism Society, and having a son who at that time was 22, I think, it gave me some, good thoughts about maybe I ought to get involved in this. And part of the reason I wanted to get involved with autism so much was not so much to help my son, because I know every parent has that role and responsibility, and I was helped by the Autism Society, but helped by other agencies as well. But I've always felt that government services for people in need, it's not a fair system. And I always felt that it's fairer to the haves than the have-nots. It's fair. It's fairer to those who have access to certain people that others may not, and usually that access is based upon you being part of the haves, the clientele. And I thought of little things like, how an IEP meeting is set up, that I was always able to, had an employer who said, take your time off, and I didn't lose any work. But if I was a hourly worker working at a Wendy's or a McDonald's, I would lose salary if I had to go there. And that's not fair. So I felt that toward the ending of my career, if I could help change that and help make the system better, but also more fair, that's why I wanted to do what I'm doing. And, I think, at the end of the day, someone may say, yes, you did or you didn't. I think we are moving to a little more fair system. It's a very difficult task, but I also think we're making sure others know that the system of accessing help is one that's, if you're poor, if you're a minority, if you live in rural areas, it's going to be more difficult to get help than it is if you're the opposite of those three categories.
I fully agree. I think it's a theme that we see quite a bit. On that topic, obviously what you do, the role that you have with the Autism Society is potentially a pretty political one, and you've appeared in front of Congress a number of times. I had asked you about a rebuttal that you wrote of the tax bill in 2017. How do you feel about where we're headed now, I guess? I
think as you get in your latter years, you become less politically correct and don't mince your words as well as you should. But I think it's the most challenging time I've seen in my professional career, if not my life. And it's because it's so difficult to predict what is happening. If you look just back at the last couple of years, and this may not be a Republican or Democratic thing. It's just the way I think our country's turning. The whole debate on healthcare and reform, the fact that we still have a discussion. If you're poor, it's okay. If people think it's okay not to provide you health care. That should be a basic right. The right to feel healthy and to live. But we're still having that debate, and it seems like we haven't resolved it yet. The idea of priorities. When I speak, I always talk about how, everyone says you can never find money for people in need in social services, but somehow, when the bank bailout occurs, you can find billions and trillions of dollars. When there's mass shootings and you want to, do whatever, whether it's right or wrong, you always could find money for that, and you should for that. But social service will always get this. It's not okay, or sure, we want to help it, but we just don't have the money. Well, I don't buy that. It's a question of a national priority, and what I worry about is as a priority of our nation, we're losing touch with. It's more important to help someone in need who, through no fault of their own, has a need, and than help a bank bail out a bank that, through its total fault, caused a need.
Yeah, right.
And I still, that's what I talk about. The tax reform bill, maybe I'm not smart enough to determine if it's going to help the economy, but I know that studies tell you that when you invest in helping people directly, that has the greatest return in an economy, including in tax dollars. Studies will show you that, governments that always find money to build sports stadiums, for people who could afford the high ticket prices and then give tax benefits, those benefits do not have any impact as when you use that money to hire direct service workers to help people in need. So it's a mixed up system, and it seems to be one that's getting even more mixed up.
Yeah, I like what you said about the complexity of the bills too. Sometimes there's just so much information that it's hard to parse out.
And I think that's sometimes intentional, and that may be intentional. It may be like, don't worry, we're going to take care of this and this and this. But we have people that we work with daily who read and understand the bill, and this is not an indictment on every member of Congress or every state legislator, because there certainly are some very, very good people who know what to do and know how to do it and know how to compromise. It's just there's a climate out there right now that suggests it's okay not to help people, and that's just not acceptable. And part of our job and the job of every agency that advocates is to say, wait, this is not what we want to have happen.
Right. So I guess that is a perfect segue to ask about the Autism Society of America. Is obviously, a pretty large, pretty well-known charity. Is part of what you see the role of the Autism Society to sort of fill in those gaps that aren't being covered then?
Well, I think the Autism Society has a lot of roles. One is we're very inclusive. So we're the only national group that I know of in the autism field that, has as our stakeholders individuals who are autistic, parents, professionals, and community leaders. So one is, I think we are uniquely set up to resolve ways to address needs, and also to be very insistent upon hearing the voice and needs of the autistic community. And I think so I think a primary thing is that when we decide what we want to do, there's a really good internal process to make sure it's really what's needed and it will work. The second thing is, I think, yes, we have to help people who need help that aren't getting help. When you have states, in a number of states where you have to wait 8 years for, government-funded services, needs don't wait 8 years. So we have to be there to help those individuals. And we do that. We helped probably close to 1 million people last year, which is a lot. But at the same time, we don't want those who should be morally or ethically responsible off the hook. So we also have stepped up in the last year or 2 or 3 our advocacy efforts. We can't. If government says we have no money for anything, that's one thing. But when government says they have no money for what we do and to help people or to help people directly, but has money for everything else, then we got to say, wait. So I think our advocacy role has increased. And I would tell you, we're nonpartisan. We call out both sides of the aisle when they do something wrong. We've had issues with the Obama administration. We have issues with the Trump administration. We try to, address those and resolve them in a very polite way. And, something that I insist upon our efforts, and as does our board. But it's difficult to meet needs when the needs are growing and money, government as a player is cutting back.
Yeah. I imagine, yeah. So when there was a time when I was involved, in some of the, I don't even know what to call it, but the workshop committees for the Autism Society of America, right? And at that time there was a pretty healthy debate around providing funding for training in early intervention versus transitional, vocational sort of stuff. Where are the priorities lying now for the ASA moving forward?
Well, what we did is we moved away from defining. That's a terrible way to say this. We start by saying how the individual who's born whenever, and then there's a diagnosis of autism. We want to be a friend with that person and that family for life. So we want that individual to go from lifespan periods of early childhood to elementary to secondary to transition or post-secondary school to adulthood to older adulthood and next in retirement. We want people to advance and advance by short-term and long-term outcome goals. And we've revised how we operate to being that we're all about how do we increase a person's quality of life in a partnership with the individual and the family. And so to that end, when someone says, where do you place your emphasis? We place our emphasis on what is needed for that individual that doesn't exist. Okay, so, and how we approach it. So on early preschool or before 5 services, it's back in some communities. There's, school districts have very good preschool programs, and others are not. In some states, insurance pays for some services that are available. In other states, they don't. Or in some states, when insurance pays, there's not access to those services, or those services, are just not readily available to certain people. So part of it is how do we get that even playing field I talked about? We in the school age years from kindergarten through graduation of high school, we still rely upon and work with public schools. But as everyone knows, no two public schools are alike. Some, are exceptional in helping a student with autism or any disability to really succeed and soar through those years. Others are nothing but warehouses. So we look and say, okay, we can't replicate that. We can't replicate a public school system, but we sure could hold those schools accountable. We can educate parents on how to best present the needs of their sons or daughters and transition that so that individuals who have autism could start, becoming their own self-advocate. The area that we then hit of transition and adulthood is an area that it has very little services. It's once you exit the high school at 21, or if you graduate before then, which is a goal we hope, we know the odds of you finding a job that will pay a livable wage is slim at best. We know the statistics on unemployment and underemployment for adults with autism remains, 70% or more. And just think of that. Think of any group of individuals. If we had a nation where a woman had a 70% unemployment rate, there'd be riots in the streets. But we as a society have said it's okay, 70%. Don't worry about it. That's horrendous. That's this is a national disgrace. But we haven't seen that change. So we work with companies that want to make that change, that want to know how to hire and they want to hire people for jobs that are meaningful and create opportunities for those individuals. But then you say, okay, if you're helping someone be independent, and they may need some kind of housing support, what's housing available? What's the cost of housing? Is there public transportation for jobs? So we're working with that. And as you know, there's just not a lot of services or support to help that individual, beyond initial, couple months when they get to work for some vocational rehab. We're spending more time now dealing with the older, plus 45, 50-year-old man or woman who's autistic who is beginning to age and has certain needs that don't come when you're young. That maybe have as a primary financial supporter to them a parent who's maybe dying. And, how are we working on making sure that person is going to be helped if their parents die? So each area has different requirements, and each area, because we're so grassroots, in one community, they may be putting a lot of efforts on transition because that's what's missing in that community, whereas another community may be spending a lot of time on early childhood development because that's what's missing. So there's no set plan because we want to have all our affiliates define what's best for that community, what works in that community. So what's the missing pieces and how do they advocate to get those missing pieces picked up? When I've been out in Portland, with you all and visiting your affiliate, it's a state affiliate. It does a phenomenal job of helping people. But it's also a state that it's probably a little better to be autistic in Oregon than to be autistic in Florida because there's a little more commitment of support and services by government in those states. So you're always adjusting what works and doesn't work in one state. So.
Yep. It's wildly variable, and you're absolutely right. We have a fantastic affiliate here in Oregon. You're absolutely right. Also, that what works in Portland does not work 50 miles outside of Portland. That's very true. Well, so that's something that's pretty unique about ASA is the grassroots piece. Like, what else would you say is not to I guess jump right in with the difference that Autism Speaks and some of these other organizations, but what does differentiate ASA in terms of messaging or otherwise?
I think a couple things. One is we're grassroots, so we're very bottoms up. This office, we could require standards of operation that you have to have, good financial management, governance, and staffing, and all that. But we don't step into what works in Portland versus Washington versus California versus New York. We want that to be local. Our affiliates are all autonomous. They carry the name Autism Society, but their own corporation, so that they have that autonomy. We're also heavily volunteer-driven, which means, I have a volunteer board that makes its decisions and governance, but so does every one of our affiliates. So, if you count the number of volunteers who give of their time and their money, it's phenomenal. We also raise money locally that stays locally. Any money that any affiliate raises stays there. We don't get any of it. If anything, we give some money to locals. But 100% of what they get that's raised by a local affiliate is how that spend is determined by that local board and that affiliate. And we don't say anything about it. I mean, as long as it's done in a way that's proper and open. And the other thing is we're highly inclusive. We're real insistent that you don't make decisions about parents without parents. So you better not make decisions about people who are on the spectrum without people on the spectrum as part of those decisions. And so we require and we monitor and make sure there's involvement of that, and there's fairness to that. And the other thing is we're not about research. I mean, not to suggest research isn't important, but we view our role as that there's anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million people who are autistic in this country, and they need help now. And any dollars we get, we got to help them now. So, every dollar we spend and every dollar spent at the affiliate goes to help services. And that doesn't mean we don't rely upon research and best practices. And then the other thing we're very big on is options. We never want to tell someone, this is the only way you could help your son or daughter, or this is the only way you could get help. We want to let the parent and or the individual make the decision of what's best for them. So we don't want to we don't want to give the answer. We want people to say, look, you have to choose what works best for you or your son or daughter, and you best know that person, and you know if you're autistic what you need, and if you don't, someone's going to help you find that. But at the end of the day, you have to own those decisions. So we try to create options anywhere. So if you say, what's a good dentist in town to take someone who's autistic, we'll say, here's 3 or 4 dentists that we know are good. If someone says, what's a good program for learning job skills, we'll say, here's the programs in the community, here's what each one offers, here's someone who may have gone through it, so you may want to talk to them. But we want to make parents and individuals to make those decisions.
Anyone listening, I encourage you to check that out for your area, because I know, at least in the Oregon market here, we've got, the listing's quite big. There's a lot of resources.
Yeah, just our, if you go to www.autism-society.org, and our autism source, which you could access on our website, has 30,000 plus listings. Plus we have, professional staff able to take your call 12 hours a day from 9 to 9 Eastern time. But those calls are 9 to 9, Monday through Friday Eastern. Those operators help people who sometimes have significant needs and are saying, I need help, and we try to help them.
Going back to the piece of choice, and so now I'm poking a little bit into the controversial things, but
sure.
You've gone on the record, even with a congressional committee, dismissing the concept of vaccines are to blame, for example, for ASD. Do you stand by that now, obviously today, and then has that been challenging for you to?
Well, it's a controversial issue. We talk to experts in the research field that we have confidence are giving us the answer, and they consistently say there's absolutely no evidence of good research to suggest that there's a direct correlation between vaccines and autism. I'm soon to be a grandfather, and if my daughter or son-in-law says to me, should their baby boy that they're going to be vaccinated, I would say definitely. I would say what I tell parents who call me, and what we say is, when you're talking vaccinations or any type of medical aspects to help your kid, you shouldn't be talking to me. I'm not a doctor. Talk to your physician, and the physician will know. And if you want to read studies on your own, we'll be happy to give you those studies, or we could refer you to places for the study. But, the studies that are often cited, that suggest autism has a link are studies that have been debunked, that have been found to not be reliable in reaching their conclusions. And, and I understand what parents may believe, or an individual may believe, that they may have gotten autism from vaccine, but it doesn't have. There's no correlation. We don't know what the cause is. So, it's what we tend to do is know what not the cause is. So there's enough evidence to say that the relationship of vaccine and autism, there's no relationship. But I would tell everyone who's listening to this, and it's not me who should make that decision. It's a parent with their doctor. But, I just would tell you that if it was me, unless my doctor told me something, that I'd be amazed that he would, I know he wouldn't tell, because I would assume my doctor and my soon-to-be grandson's doctor would say vaccines are the right thing to do. The risk of not getting vaccinated also has to be affected. Vaccinations have saved us from kids dying of mumps and measles. And the flu. You have to weigh both sides. So
I agree with you completely, and I had to ask that one because I know for myself, even as a related health professional, that's probably one of the number one questions I get asked all the time.
Sure.
What do you think? What are some other questions that you get asked a lot?
I get asked a lot about the cause. And I understand that. I understand why people, I'll give you an example. And I have a heart issue. I'm 64, soon to be 65. I had a heart attack when I was 39. I know my grandfather, his my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my dad all had heart issues. So I know it's heredity, okay? But I don't know what caused that heredity. You know, why do I have it, okay? So, but I'm able to learn. There's enough good research, and cardiologists could sit down and show me a diagram and show what my artery and heart looks like and show me the problems. Autism, you can't do that. So parents particularly, and some individuals ask us, you know, what may have caused this? Is it hereditary? Is it something that people are born with? Is it something that you get? Is it caused by the environment? Is it caused by genes? Is it caused by, you know, the thousands of chemicals out there? And unfortunately, we can't say yes. So what we try to say is, look at, you know, there's studies being done, but in the meantime, you know, let's put the attention not so much what caused it, but let's put the attention on how we could help the person with autism. And the other thing we want to say is that, it's not someone, I want to say this politely so no one yells at me, you know, it's not, a parent didn't do anything wrong if the child is born with autism, no different than my mother and father did anything wrong in the fact that I have a heart issue. I mean, that's what happens. It's not, you know, it's not, we try to tell parents when they call us and individuals when they call us that, you know, let's embrace this, let's work with this, you know, there's mentors, we're going to help you get through this. And the other question I get a lot of is, you know, how do you define autism for someone like you, Lucas, and my son, who is able to be very verbal. In my case with my son, you know, he has needs and he lets me talk about them, but he went to college, he lives on his own. That's autism. But on the other end is the person that we all know, or, you know, everyone knows someone who needs 24-hour care, who is very self-injurious, who, if left alone, safety may be a major issue.
Right, sure.
So the question I get asked a lot when I speak is how do you define that such a big spectrum? And not to say that my son doesn't have certain needs, then maybe, you know, they need to be addressed, but how do you address out of priority, even if there's little money, who gets help first? So we get asked that, you know, and my theory is, in our organization, is when you have to prioritize, safety has to come first, you know, the safety of an individual. But, you know, you have to prioritize the person in most need. But sometimes someone who appears to be very high functioning may have significant needs, and they're just not readily visible. So we get asked that a lot, and that's a tough question to answer. Is the spectrum too large? You know, should we categorize it and segment it? And, you know, everyone has a decision on, a response to that. You know, the other question we get asked is about a cure. And it's a tough issue because, you know, there are people on the spectrum who I have the utmost respect for, and my son is clearly one who has embraced his autism and, you know, doesn't want to be cured or whatever. There are others who may want to be cured. There are parents who have embraced it. There are parents who say, I would like to. We don't want to get into that debate a lot because, you know, it's a tough debate. But, you know, again, we want to create a world where if you have autism, you're accepted, you're valued, you're given opportunity, you're supported, you're helped, and we're going to get you to the highest level of quality of life possible. And, you know, all those other things of cause and cure and research, put those on the side. We're going to help get your son or daughter to that point and help you as an individual get to that point.
Great. Those are perfect. All those questions sound very familiar.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know one of the ones you mentioned that I get asked a lot is the, you know, there's autism and then there's autism sort of quote of, right. You know, like what is the self-injurious versus the other. And, you know, I think one thing I've said before, and maybe I'm right with this, but is that a lot of people conceptualize spectrum as a line, when really it could be a color wheel of, strengths and these things, I think a lot of folks don't think of it that way. They think of it as high functioning or low functioning, when really it's a lot more complex.
Well, and also you have people with any type of condition sometimes have dual conditions. We see a lot of people with autism may have hearing issues, may have depression, mental health issues, and that's with any one of us. I have a heart issue. I'm prone to be diabetic. So usually you're dealing with people. That's one of the things you're dealing with is how do you help a person when it may be not only autism impacting that needs to be helped so we can move people along. It may be that they can't hear. So, how do we help both? And so that's another big issue we try to tell people. It's just not it's not always just a single type of issue. We're dealing with a lot of complexities.
Right. And one of them, like you say, none of us are defined by any one single thing about us, right? Yeah, absolutely. My favorite story is when, in the autism community, there's this big fight between how do you describe someone who has an autism diagnosis, and there's a lot of people, I mix this up all the time, so correct me if I'm wrong, about first person, that, this is a person who lives with autism versus someone who's autistic. So I asked my son, I said, you're my expert. Tell me, how do you want to be described? And whatever you describe is how I'm going to describe in my job. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, Evan, should I describe that you live with autism or that you're autistic? And he thinks for a second and he says, Dad, I live with you. I don't live with autism. So I said, guess what? I'm referring to you as autistic, but I will guarantee every time I speak, I'll have some parents write me a nasty note and say, you were disloyal to people with autism. And if I had the whole speech talking about people who live with autism, I'll get letters saying, why are you saying that? You don't live with being a male or something. Yeah, right. I said I'm going to get yelled at one or the other, so I'm going with what my son tells me. Put the blame on him. So. No, that's good. Yeah, that's the person first language thing is something that comes up a lot for us too, and that's the only answer I really feel like I can offer is that it's up to the individual, with autism. It's not my place to say.
You're a good interviewer.
Hey, perfect. There we go. I like that. Yeah. Well, if there, I guess if there was one place that you feel like, if we can invest all of our energy in one area, like what's the biggest issue facing neurodiverse communities today?
I think the biggest issue we're facing right now is honestly two issues. Is this whole thing we started this whole conversation with, is this, how do we get a country to really see this as a need? And this is a need that we as Americans, as human beings, need to address. The second big issue that really keeps me worried is this growing rift between parents who want the best for their children, adult or young, who are on the spectrum versus those on the spectrum who may not respect the parents, but their parents may not respect those who are speaking on behalf of people with autism. And both sides are right and both sides are wrong. As I say, and that fight, it gets worse. And one of the things I do in my job is I call that out when that happens, because anytime change occurs in our society, you need everyone to be part of that change. If you look at the history of social change, of the role of minorities, of African Americans, of Latino Americans, of women, of gays, social change occurred when it was not just the individuals, but was who were impacted by the discrimination and the denial of almost everything. It was resolved when everyone got to the table and said, this is wrong. And it was led by those individuals. When the women's movement were led by women, but men were part of that movement. In the movement of the civil rights, it was the people of all color were part of that. And so my feeling is we all want the same thing, and we need to all agree that we may have some differences, but we all want the best for every person with autism. And how we say it and how we talk to each other may sometimes not imply that, but I know in talking to everyone, they all want the best. And sometimes it comes across maybe not like that, but I know people who sometimes get called out for saying they're on one side of that bed on the other, but I know they all want the best. And that's good. But the bad is we spend way too much time with the infighting that goes on in the autism community, and when we do that, it comes at the expense of helping people who have real needs. So
right. That's a great message, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I haven't seen. There's nothing in my work that can get as vicious as the debates about autism, whether that's ideology or what it is, and it's remarkable. But it is important to remember. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Everybody wants the best.
Well, and I think the bigger issue is also, it's not the bigger. I have had more congressmen or senators tell me that they're afraid to take a position. And I understand this. I would be too, because they said, what you're asking for, someone just came in and wanted the total opposite. So part of it is also how do you get the community together to come up with a common agenda? When you have a group that is arguing vaccines cause autism, and that's the message, and you have another group arguing we need money for this or this or this, you can't come to a common agenda. And politicians don't want everyone screaming at them. So we almost create the environment where they say, look, how can you have me act on your behalf if you all can't decide what you're asking me to act on your behalf for? And I understand that. I've been told that many times. And, and we just need to get everyone to say, look, we may disagree, but let's look at how much progress we've done in the last 20 years, and maybe we're not doing anywhere near what's needed, and maybe our approach needs to change a lot. And my organization, every organization needs to take a look at that. So,
for the organization to be that introspective, especially with the volunteer board and the size of the board, I mean, that's fantastic. And certainly it's one of the reasons why, I've supported ASA. So.
You're very strong. Yeah. I mean, that's the other difference we have is we have thousands of people supporting us and from giving us $1 to large gifts. And, it's a neat to be part of that, you're surrounded by so many wonderful, beautiful people caring.
Well, on that note, is there any one message, that you'd like to convey to the health professionals? Go ahead.
I want people to hear this. Okay.
Sure.
I want people not to accept no. That's my new mantra.
Okay.
Because, and now let me go back. If someone says don't run across the street and get hit by a car, accept that, okay? But I don't want people who petition, who advocate with their schools, with their government, with us, with anyone, just to easily accept no. Because no is such an easy thing to say. So I know in my life with my son's IEP meetings and the work I do that you so often get told no when no is not an acceptable answer. Because no to me might mean not now, but it doesn't resolve it. And the second thing I want people to understand is that if someone says no, listen to the reason why. And then ask them, why does that reason apply to me? And I'll give you the example. If government says I can't afford to help provide money to reduce the waiting list, in Florida, Fort Lauderdale Airport built a brand new runway. Brand new runway, I think, if I'm correct, cost like $1.3 billion. And the reason they did it, which was tremendously good reason, was they realized that with increased air traffic over time, they would need a second runway. And for someone who's flying on a plane 2-3 days a week, I like that. That means you're not waiting to take off or land. So they forward thinking. In Florida, there's at least an 8-year wait for services for people with a disability.
Wow, that one.
So let's look at this. Government says it's okay for someone who's flying into Fort Lauderdale, which is a wonderful city, a wonderful airport. It's okay to realize in 5-6 years we've got to have a second airport because we don't want people to wait a long time. We're talking 20 minutes, a long time, but it's okay to wait 8 years if you need service help. Imagine if they took the $1 billion, didn't build the runway, and put it toward debt services. How many people could have been helped? And that money would have a much better it would have a strong replication job as far as tax dollars and money into the economy. But so then you say to government, well, how could you do that? And they'll say, well, that's fees we collect, and it has to be used for the airport. Well, no, it doesn't. That's a decision government makes. Government could use those fees to help people who have needs. You know, you could do that. I mean, we use license fees when you get married. A lot of states use those fees to help women and men who are victims of domestic violence. That's a good decision, in my opinion. But there's no good rational thinking when you could say I could build an extra runway, and I'm not picking on Fort Lauderdale, but they're doing exactly what they should do. But I'm picking on government leaders who say they don't see something wrong with not doing both. And you know, and the people we serve aren't going to ever be on those planes waiting to take off. I mean, they can't even afford, you know, to exist month to month. So I don't see them taking plane rides to and from Fort Lauderdale to spend the winter in Fort Lauderdale. So I don't see them spending times to be able to buy the ticket for the skybox at the new football stadium, where the owners of Skybox get tax breaks. It just doesn't happen. So people should get mad in a polite way. I'm not, you know, be very cordial, be very nice, but we got to stop saying, no, we're not buying this. You know, you got to start looking at the people are waiting 8 years and the thousands on waiting list throughout the country. You know, there's an estimated 600,000 to 700,000 people we've been told, and no one keeps data, but that's what everyone thinks to conserve. That's people waiting for services. That's a national disgrace. It's called the accident. It's like, you know, we always find ways to do great things and rest assured. And again, I love the Fort Lauderdale Airport. It's beautiful. It's easy to get into. It brings in a lot of people to that area. They're not at fault. Government's at fault because government says it's okay to do that, but not to help people with a disability, and that to me is obscene.
A lot of this care that we're talking about actually is a lot less expensive than a runway. Not to minimize the cost, although if I remember that airport correctly, there's a little putting green inside too. So
yeah, there is. No, there's a couple putting greens. No, that's what this whole thing has got to be about. This thing has got to be about equity and fairness, and that the value of someone waiting on a plane to take off is very strong. But it can't be greater than the value of the kid who's waiting for services in Florida, who with those services could get a job and could be able to one day afford to fly to Fort Lauderdale. That's the problem.
Well, Mr. Badesch, thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. So those of you listening, if you found us on iTunes or through Facebook, take a look down below. We'll have a link to the Autism Society of America. If it's on Facebook, of course, there'll be a fun little donate button there, too, to support this awesome group. Mr. Badesch, thanks for your time joining us today.
Hey, listen, thank you, buddy. You're educating and helping a lot of people. So one of the ways we get our message out is through you. So God bless you and thank your listeners. And
thanks so much. Congratulations on becoming a grandfather soon.
Well, I can't wait. The baby's due on my birthday, which is even better. So we'll see about that. Thank you, buddy.
All right.
See you later.
Thanks.
Bye.
Well, thank you so much to Scott Badesch for coming on. That was a really great conversation. As always, please join our conversation. Find our Facebook group online and leave us a comment. We've been having a lot of really great discussions on there. So we would love for you to join us and tell us what you think about the podcast. Let us know if you have a question. We love hearing from you guys. So please hop on Facebook and say hello.
Rachel, it's been hopping over there, right? I mean, there's been people posting and asking questions, and we get in there, and then we answer them, and then we ask questions back because we don't know everything. We just know what we know, right? Yeah,
the dialogue has been really wonderful. I mean, I'm learning so much through all of our, loyal listeners, and it's so exciting because that's the beautiful thing about, connecting on social media is that there's so many different perspectives, and we get to share that together.
And speaking of loyal listeners, thank you, loyal listeners, if you hit the subscribe button. And if you haven't, now is the time. You don't want to miss another episode. Subscribing, what that means, whatever podcasting tool you use, when you hit the subscribe button, it means you never miss an episode. So it automatically comes to your device and you get whatever content we push out to you. So don't miss anything. Hit subscribe.
for Talking with Tech. I'm Rachel Madel, joined by Chris Bugay. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will talk to you next week.